Thank you for coming on Saturday. It's such a nice, beautiful day outside, and I can imagine it's hard to be inside the cinema hall. But last film show, which is partly autobiographical, inspired from my childhood while growing up in Gujarat countryside, which is in northwest of India. And since we premiered at Tribeca, we've been having sort of wonderful journey with this, and it's been so yes, and we are really happy to show as part of the Asian World Film Festival. Siddharth Roy Kapur, who is also accompanying us, he's a producer from India, and we wanted to get our cast and crew, but to get visa has been challenging. So thank you so much, and we'll be here at the end for Q&A about last film show.
Thanks, Nalin. So I'm not going to say too much. We'll let the movie speak for itself, and we'll be here after to have a short chat. Thank you all for coming. The film started off before the pandemic and was completed then, and while it is an ode to cinema, I think you'll see why it's even more relevant today with the theatrical experience now being under a cloud, people having to be forced to go back into the cinemas. This actually is an ode to that first time you walked into a darkened cinema hall and saw a film for the first time, and the feeling that you got and the feeling that you experienced then. So we hope you enjoyed. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. It is my great honor and privilege to moderate this Q&A. So I'd like to first of all introduce the director, the lovely Pan Nalin, and one of the film's producers, Siddharth Roy Kapur. So, Nalin, if you can just begin by telling us how this film came about, and a little bit of the backstory of where it came from, and how, for instance, you made the kids so smart and precocious, because were you like that as a kid, or?
Okay. I never thought I was going to revisit my childhood in cinema ever, since I made my first film. But I used to visit my parents who live in the same region you saw in the film. And during 2011, during 2011, I was visiting my parents, and he told me I should go and see my childhood friend, who was a person called Mohammed Pai, projectionist, and he's in bad shape because so I said, okay. I had not seen him in many, many years, and I saw him in the street with push carts selling vegetable, and I had always seen him. My memory was always in projection room. He was a third generation projectionist, and we both started talking, and he told me that he lost his job because all the cinemas have digital, and he liked the character Fazal in the movie. He did not know how to run or read or how to download DCP, and it was a very complex. So he was fired, and not only he, but many other projectionists were fired. And when we started talking, he told me in his own cynical way that the projectors are becoming now spoon and plates, and the film reels are turning into plastic mugs and bangles. And there was kind of a sadness in him, but that made me think, that really started all the thinking process. Because as a kid, since I started doing cinema, whenever I used to come home, my sisters and my friends always used to tell stories that, no wonder you make cinema, because when you were a kid, we used to hear your story with matchboxes. We ended up 5-6 days in juvenile home because you had stolen the reel of Amitabh Bachchan, who is a superstar. So all this, like the family talk. But that time, while going back in a bus to a place called Ahmedabad, I was in a bus, and it was full with Indian wedding party, where women were wearing all the bangles. So 2 days ago, I had met my friend Mohammed Pai, and we were just talking about what films are becoming, and suddenly my mind sort of drifted that, oh, maybe some of these women are unaware, they might be wearing some of the greatest filmmaker on their hand, you know. So all that in year about 2018-19 became a kind of a screenplay because I realized it's going to be 10 years and suddenly it looks like ages ago the celluloid era was, but it was just 10 years ago. And I started writing the story and started going back to the places where I grew up with my cinematographer, production designer, and more stories came about. And then ultimately, that's what it became, Last Film Show. Yeah.
Wow, you know, we've been talking about this film for a while and I didn't know the backstory, so thank you for telling me. How did you cast the children? I'm sure that was quite an ordeal, and everyone else in this film for that matter.
Yes, the casting was very well. At least on 2 occasions I stopped making this movie because I couldn't find the right cast. As you know, Samay's role is so important. So the first thinking is always, oh, we have to have a professional actor, child actor who can play this role. So we started casting in Mumbai and Ahmedabad, but those castings were really disappointment because kids in India grow up with some ideas of, influences by the popular cinema or TV reality show or, so we sort of changed with the casting director, Dilip Shankar, the whole strategy and said, let's go to the part of the villages or part of Saurashtra where we shot the film, where kids rarely go to see film. And that was a good idea, I think. And Dilip had a great experience because, he had worked with people like Ang Lee, where he had found Suraj Sharma to play in Life of Pi. So together with 5-6, casting director, we went through some 3,000 audition. And ultimately, Bhavin Rabari sort of came as a savior because he was with his 2 cows and a buffalo living in a small village, had rarely been to see cinema. But the series of shots I did with him of his eyes, we edited put together about 25-30 shots, only eyes, and without any dialogues, without any word. We both had goosebumps in our edit suite and we said, okay, that's going to be him. That's like really our Samay. And rest of the cast, the 3 actors are non-actor from, one is from Richa Meena is from Mumbai, and Bhavesh Shimali and Dipen Rawala from Ahmedabad. So you can say more or less it's everyone's first movie, even though they've done smaller role in theater and yeah.
Yeah, I just love the scene where you see a lot of the kids together. It almost feels natural and choreographed at the same time, which is really, really lovely. You made a lot of interesting choices in terms of cinematography. Sadly, you could fully see it at the screening, but if you watch the original, the colors really, really pop. And the use of sound and silence. And I was wondering if you were inspired by some of the filmmakers you mentioned at the end in terms of your visual and sound choices in this film.
I think of course, there are conscious and unconscious influences in the film. As a filmmaker, especially now, we cannot escape those influences. But for me, the silence has always been a very useful, sound design and silence have been useful part of storytelling. And I often say that when we make 2 or 2.5 hour movie, we have back-to-back dialogues, and if film we say is an imitation of life, then our lives are not like that. We don't talk non-stop 24 hours. In fact, it's the opposite. We do end up spending 16 to 18 hours in silence, and so when we make movies, why do we have to have dialogues non-stop? And if I use silence, then I'm arty filmmaker or it's a movie for the festival, all this label. So I have always tried to explore that life must go on in silence without dialogue. There has to be a way in cinema to push that, but not for silence for sake of silence. It is to make a part of experience of the storytelling, the emotion what characters are going through. And sometimes when they don't speak, I do believe we as a spectator are creating our own dialogues in our head. And sometimes they are more powerful than the one which I write and spoon feed people. Except one sequence when they make the final projector, there it was a conscious tribute to silent cinema, where I pulled away all the sound for about 40 seconds.
So we are very honored to have one of the producers here, Siddharth Roy Kapur. For those of you who don't know who he is, he's one of the most prolific producers of contemporary Indian cinema. So thank you for joining us all the way from Mumbai today. How did you join this project with no stars in it? Pray tell, especially in an Indian market.
That's a great question. I think, when I think about a movie like this, there is a star system, of course, in India, and most commercial movies tend to be star-driven. But for a film like this, it would actually detract from the experience if we try to cast a star in any of the roles of the father, the mother, or in fact the projectionist, because I think the way Nalin's told the story is so innocent and so beautiful, and you can actually tell that these aren't really actors who do this for a living. These are people living out lives that he's been able to imbue in them, and that he's been able to make them feel these characters in such an instinctive way. Having anyone with a preconceived notion of a certain stardom or a certain identity, which tends to happen with stars, would have actually detracted from this. So I'm really glad that this film doesn't have any known faces at all.
So, I once got into a fight with a sales agent from Wild Bunch because we were talking about how to sell Indian quote-unquote art house cinema, and he basically said he couldn't sell anything that was not showing exotic India. With that being said, Nalin, you managed to get a very, very great American distributor for this project. How was that, and how challenging was that? And Sid, if you can also talk to how Indian cinema is being distributed and accepted in the American market. I mean, this is a perfect place to showcase such films because we normally don't have an ability to show Asian films to the American market, so.
When it comes to the popular commercial cinema from India, we have a South Asian diaspora overseas that's always been sort of a captive audience for our cinema. So they tend to enjoy movies with big stars, which are very commercial, mass entertainers. And in a sense, I think, independent cinema from India has sort of been hobbled by the fact that we've been victims of our own success when it comes to having that captive market. You've got 35 million South Asians outside of India who already are an audience for the mainstream cinema that we make. And therefore, independent cinema has found it that much harder to be able to break out into the sectors outside. What has happened in the last few years, I think, with filmmakers like Nalin, is that they've really pushed the boundaries of trying to ensure that they get distribution for stories that are not told in the typical grammar of storytelling that we're used to in Indian cinema. And I think that's been an effort that's been sort of ongoing for many years now. And back in the day when I used to be at UTV Motion Pictures, we tried to do at least a couple of films every year that push the envelope as far as that's concerned. But again, I have to say we probably didn't do enough to be able to reach out outside of the Indian diaspora. And I think that's something that Nalin has managed to do really effectively.
Thank you. I think, of course, Sid has done some of the most amazing, innovative, so-called independent cinema, but original storytelling, and a lot of risks were taken over several decades of your work. For me, when I make movie, it was always important that first I fall in love with the story, and then nothing stops me. I try everything in my power to try and make that film. So when I made my first feature, it was literally 19 years ago. It was called Samsara, and it was acquired by Miramax. And I think we as a society, especially in India, we like to label things. So why did Miramax acquire my movie, and why it was being released in so many countries? So I said, because it went to festival. So once it went out into distribution and started making money, then they say, oh, that's because there must be some sex scene in the movie. So I think there's always, we need to give label independent film, art house film, or maybe it's because it's exotic, but I don't think there is any such formula for any country, because we have all seen whatever movies which have traveled, whether from South Korea, Japan, or and people try to find that, okay, why this film we can sell easily. And if you get into that, I never thought ever when I make movie that how am I going to sell this. I know that I have to be true to the story, honest to the story, and then in cinematic treatment, I want to try and push the envelope as much as possible with top-notch cast and crew, sound design, camera, music, where I enjoy the process of filmmaking, and not to have any, try to avoid as much as, excuses that, oh, I didn't have the budget, so I couldn't do this, or I didn't have the money. I've never tried to hide my work and those excuses. So I think certain way, the kind of films I did from Samsara, once it was picked up by Miramax and many other distributors, there was a niche audience around the world, and the distributors who were able to risk my second feature and say, okay, we can even take his feature. Then when I made a documentary, they even bought my documentary and released theatrically and say, oh, there too, it seems to be making money. So in a way, it has been a commercial success, and the film has to make commercial sense. So that's how I became kind of an independent producer myself, because everywhere I had to make a script, then make a budget, then make production planning. I do the location scouting, and then I figure out, can I make this in a couple of $1 million? And if I do it, who's going to buy it? And if they can buy the movie, then probably I'll be able to make the second one. So very often the journey starts with pre-sale and finding agent, sales agent. And if I don't find sales agent and pre-sale, I have quite a few projects which I haven't done because I wouldn't be able to make them otherwise. So that was always a criteria. So in this case also, last film show, we did have a sales company out of France, Orange Studio, and we said, okay, now we have someone who's going to accompany us in selling this film. And that was the start. And then, as the journey began, Roy Kapur Films joined to release it in India, and bringing it here. So I think that's what happens. Ultimately, you start finding partners and distributors who start believing in the film, and we were lucky, like we had Sochiku in Japan, or Medusa in Italy, or Samuel Goldwyn Films in the US. But there was a film, to prove that we could move audiences regardless of wherever we are on the globe. Yeah.
So I have two questions and then we're going to go to the audience. So my second last question to you is sort of along the lines of what we've been talking about. There's an interesting part about being Brahmin, and that there are two types of Brahmins, the ones who speak English and the ones who don't. What inspired that very astute observation about Indian society, and how has that played out so far for your audiences?
In fact, it was not about Brahmin. It was just a general statement which my teacher used. This is something which he really told me, that don't worry, in the future in India there's going to be no caste. There'll be only two castes. One, the people who speak English, and one who don't speak English. So you better learn English, otherwise. And what he meant was that if you wanted to study any higher education, they were all in English medium, school. Like I wanted to go to Fine Arts, National Institute of Design. Even the Indian Institute of Film and Television was required to be fluent in English. It was written in application form. So it was his interpretation that if you want to become doctor, engineer, architect, or anything in India, first you learn English, because medium of instruction across India for all higher education is English. So that's kind of statement.
And can you tell our audience, both of you, about what happened when you learned that India had nominated you as its official Oscar entry submission this year?
We were ecstatic because, it is a pretty tough field. There are, a lot of movies made in India every year, as you know. We're the most prolific nation when it comes to the number of films that we make. And so for the jury to have selected us to represent the country, of course, is a matter of great honor, and we were thrilled. And I think, we didn't get over it for a few days.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, with Sid, we were actually busy preparing the release, and India has such a vast culture of cinema, film from south, north, so we were really occupied with releasing the film, which was supposed to be, few weeks from that day. And when the announcement came, of course, we were completely thrilled, and of course, for my cast and crew, it was one of the best news they can get. And I was really thankful to Film Federation of India and those jury members whom I'm yet to meet, unanimously voting for Last Film Show to come here and be India's entry to the 95th Oscars. It was a great moment, yeah.
So we're just going to open questions for the audience, for whoever. We have 1 minute apparently, so one question from whoever is a lucky fellow to raise their hand.
Well, you talk about food, the food element. I loved that it was just it was so prominent, but not really food.
Yes. So, sorry, what about food?
Just your thoughts on how that became such a prominent, important part, the dishes you picked, the cooking.
I mean, in fact, it all started, of course, with my mother and my family. Everyone has only one obsession: is food. Morning, evening, afternoon, and Samay as he's going to swap his lunchbox and win Fazal's heart to watch free movies. So food became a very important metaphor in terms of the way I wanted to film and what I would be using in terms of recipes, which all come from Kathiawad, the region of Gujarat, where I would say almost 85% of population are vegetarian, since centuries. So it's all vegetarian food. And at the same time, as you know, in India, we call movies masala movies, because with all the spices. So there is that metaphor as well. But in the end, when I was writing script, it has become very much about film, food, friends, family, and future, those 5 F. So that's what resulted into Last Film Show. Yeah.
I think we're done. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.